Welcome everybody to the Learn and Grow series. I'm your host, Loomba, a real estate investor. And every week I try to bring an awesome guest with us who shares a lot of information, how to grow, investment perspective, as well as personal growth. So today our special guest is my good friend, Yakov Smart. Yakov is considered to be the leading expert when it comes to attracting high net worth investors and raising capital online. He's the author of Disrupting LinkedIn and a sought after authority by top real estate entrepreneurs across the United States and Canada. To date, Yakov's innovative strategies and systems have resulted in tens of millions of private capital raised to fund real estate deals. And today our topic is how to raise more capital and find high net worth investors on autopilot. Well, welcome, Yakov. But before we get started, I'm going to go through a small little disclaimer. This session is strictly for educational purposes and should not be considered as legal, accounting, or investment advice. If you have any legal questions, please consult with your attorney, financial advisors, and CPAs. This session is strictly for educational purposes. And welcome again, Yakov. Stage is all yours.
Awesome. Thank you for having me, Vinky. And I appreciate the disclaimer. That way I'm not having to say it too, because I always like to say that as well. I'm not an SEC attorney, not a CPA, certainly not giving investment advice here on this presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen in a moment. I want to keep this interactive. I'm looking, I know we have some familiar names and faces, so I think some of you have heard some of my stuff before. So just let me know in the chat box, those of you who maybe I don't know yet, where you're coming in from today. And if you've heard me before, let me know in the chat box as well. I always like to keep things fresh, right? Okay, cool. Angel is in Wichita Falls, Texas. Awesome. Angel, I believe we actually met last week in person, which is awesome. Yep, exactly. At UP22, you were rocking cool hair. Got 302 Kenton from Denver. Okay, not too far. Kevin from Trinidad and Tobago. Awesome. Heard that's a beautiful place. Got Jared coming from the Bay Area, San Francisco area. Awesome. All right. And then I know we've got Alicia's right here in Arizona. So my neck of the woods, which is cool, here in the Phoenix area. Awesome. And then I know a couple more people are coming in. I'm sure a couple of people are watching us live as well. For those of you watching us live on LinkedIn and on Facebook too, drop a comment. We want to know, because I'm sure Vink is curious. I'm going to be curious as well, how many people are watching this live and how many people are watching the recording after. So if you're watching live, do us a favor, just comment hashtag live. That way more people see it. So it's hashtag live. And if you're watching the recording, then you can comment hashtag replay. Okay. So with that said, let's go ahead and do the cue up the drum roll, get the music ready. We're about to rock and roll here, and we're going to share my screen in a moment, and we're going to go ahead and get started here. All right. So today's topic, as Vinky mentioned, how to raise more capital and find high net worth investors on autopilot. Okay. Big topic. Intriguing headline, I know. We're going to talk about what that means here in a moment. So here's what you're going to discover today, okay? We're going to talk about the number one question you should be asking yourself when it comes to raising capital on social media, okay? And I'll give you a hint, it's probably not what you think. A lot of people get this wrong. We're going to redefine what that even means, okay? We're also going to talk about why your LinkedIn profile is an untapped gold mine for raising capital and attracting accredited investors. Okay, a lot of people are on LinkedIn. They don't quite know how to use it for putting themselves out there and building relationships with investors, especially those investors who are beyond your current network. Okay, and we're also going to talk about the hidden system, okay, for adding investors and scaling your capital raising on autopilot. How do you really systematize this stuff in a way where a lot of it runs without you? Okay. And also how to do this without having to create a bunch of content or waste money on ads, okay? So before we get into the challenges, the real reasons why you're probably here, I'm actually gonna turn off my webcam. I'm gonna come back on camera for the Q&A. Reason for that being is when I present, I like to kind of be in my groove. And if I see myself, sometimes it throws me off. So I have a thing, I'll turn on my video towards the end here, but you still should be able to see the sound of my voice and just importantly, what's on my screen. Okay, so the reasons you're here, key challenges, right? Chances are you didn't just come here for entertainment, even though I love spending time with Vinky. She's always got great stuff to say. Chances are you're here for a reason. You're here to learn and you're probably having some of these challenges, right? Number one, not having enough access to private money, not having enough access to private capital to take down the deals that you're looking for to really grow and scale your portfolio. Also, some of you, and I'll ask you a little later where you're at in your capital raising journey, but some of you have gone through the experience where you did have a deal and you were scrambling to raise capital, right? And you know how stressful and how frustrating that can be, okay? So we're going to talk about ways to avoid that so you're not having to scramble to raise capital at the 11th hour and wonder if you're going to lose out on that deal, okay? The big challenge, and I believe one of the main reasons why most people are here and paying attention right now, is you're probably having trouble finding investors beyond your current network, right? You know, it's one thing to go to your friends and family for capital, but what about using social media? What about using the internet online to go out there and build real relationships in a way that's natural, in a way that's real, in a way that's human, with potential investors, people who can be LPs, limited partners in your deals. We're going to talk about some ways to do that today. And it's a big challenge I see across the capital raising and syndication spaces is not being able to grow and continue to evolve and grow that list of potential investors. You also might be here because you've wasted a lot of time and money on branding, networking, ineffective marketing, right? Maybe you've been hustling to build relationships and you don't have much to show for it, right? We're going to talk about why that is and some solutions here as well. And maybe it's confusing, right? Let's face it, you enjoy the deal side of real estate, but capital raising can be intimidating. Finding investors, even talking about money can be a difficult thing, can be challenging, especially if you've never done it before. So another reason why you're here is you don't want to reinvent the wheel. You want to be able to rely on systems that are going to make your life so much easier, okay? So common costs of these challenges, right? As all of you know, if you're not able to bring the capital to the table, you're going to risk losing out on potential deals. It's my belief, I'll talk about this a little later probably too, it's my belief that in the next 12 to 18 months, there's going to be deals out there that are as good as any deals that you've ever seen, right? Why is that? Economic climate, a lot of different factors. There are going to be people selling deals. And I think there's going to be an opportunity to really grow your net worth and grow your portfolio at a much faster rate if you can take down those deals, if you have access to the private capital you need. Another potential challenge is paying a premium for access to capital, right? Some of you have probably done deals where you've had people come in and raise for you, right? And really in this business, as some of you have seen, the leverage is in the money, just like with a lot of things, right? So the people who have access to capital, they're going to be able to charge a premium for accessing that capital, right? And it can get very expensive where you're giving bigger and bigger pieces of the pie to people just because they can raise capital and you can't, right? Another common challenge is the headache, the frustration of scrambling to raise capital, not knowing what to do, not knowing how to find investors. And the biggest thing is time and money wasted. If you're like me, you probably love momentum. I thrive off of momentum. I love seeing progress in momentum. One of the worst things in the world for me and for you is if you feel like you're wasting time and money, especially on the capital raising side, without making progress and moving towards the lifestyle and net worth that you desire. Okay, so that's why you're here. Not having access to capital results in these challenges. We're going to talk about today how to move towards solving some of these challenges. Okay. So what is the solution, right? The solution is having a turnkey system in place for attracting high net worth investors beyond your current network. So you can grow your investor database and raise a lot more capital, not just for one specific deal, not just for a deal that you've got coming up, but consistently on a recurring basis so this stuff really starts to snowball for you, right? So before I share a little bit more about myself, I'm curious, right? I'm not going to go into a 20-minute spiel about my life story. If you want, I'll tell you the place where you can find that. But I'm curious because I want to know who's with us, especially on Zoom. Let me know in the chat box, please, how much capital you've raised and what you want to raise more capital for, right? So if you haven't raised any capital, that's okay too. Just let me know. I want to make sure this is geared towards where everyone's at. So how much capital you've raised, let's say in the past 12 months, and what type of projects you're looking to raise more capital for. Just let me know in the chat box. See what we've got here. Okay, so Julie, is zero starting up development housing. Warren hasn't raised yet. Jared has raised 1.5 million. Got stuck on his last deal. He had a roadblock. Okay, that happens sometimes. Alicia's raised 100K. Okay, good start. Kenton says he's raised 100 million. Okay, that's a decent chunk of change. He's got some good stuff. Okay, what else? Jared wants to raise 4 million for Angels next deal. I'm assuming that means from Angels, right? Kevin is looking for a current deal, right? So we've got people with different levels of experience here, which is awesome. So we're going to really gear this towards, finding more investors and thinking about capital raising as a system rather than just for a one-off deal, right? That's a big shift that you can make here. Okay. So who am I, right? I'm not, like I mentioned a moment ago, I'm not going to spend lots of time sharing my story with you. There's a lot of places where you can find that online. I'm going to give you some highlights here because I know for me, whenever I'm on a call like this, I'm curious, okay, who's the person sharing? What's their track record? And, what's the unique perspective that they bring to the table? Okay, so I'm based here out of Phoenix, Arizona, in the Phoenix, Scottsdale area. I do this as a business. My team and I actually work with people. We build out these systems for people. We also give them strategic guidance to implement them so that they're able to add more investors, grow their database, and raise more capital. Been in business since 2017. Originally started off working with a number of different businesses in a number of different niches. And my claim to fame was in LinkedIn marketing and LinkedIn lead generation, right? Wrote the book on LinkedIn marketing. I think you might have mentioned Disrupting LinkedIn, authored that book. And since then, it's about 2020, we've worked almost exclusively with people who want to raise more capital and find passive investors. You may have seen me on some of the biggest podcasts in the real estate investing space, The Best Ever Show, been on Rod Cleef's podcast, been on Vinky's podcast. So several of the big podcasts in alternative investing and real estate syndication, probably seen me on. I know some of you have heard me on different channels, different platforms before as well. To date, we have tens of millions in private capital raised as a result of this system that I'm going to be sharing with you. And the truth is it flat out works. Everything is data driven and it's optimized in a way where you can really take this and start to scale it as you add more investors, as you have more deals, and as you raise more capital. Okay, just a few of the people that we've worked with. I want to share these with you. So Mark, for example, he's booked 200 plus calls coming from social media, coming from people who he didn't know who were outside of his current network. And there's Amy, who when she shared this, she was booking 10 plus calls with potential investors per week using the system. She did a deal where she raised $1 million plus just for that specific deal, coming from people who weren't in her database before, right? People beyond her current network, right? And being able to grow her database to 300 plus people, okay? And that's just, you have to understand too, with capital raising, things really compound, right? As this database grows, you're going to have people investing with you if you don't already again and again. Kenton can probably attest to that if he's raised 100 mil plus. Repeat investors are important. And there's Scott, who raised 20 million plus, coming from both private equity and from retail investors. And I'll share a little more, another example a little later on, another specific case study. We've had several more, of course. So the rapid investor attraction system. Let's start with the number one question you should be asking yourself when it comes to raising capital on social media. Okay, and here's that question. I'll read it to you here. You can see it. I want you to take a moment and really think of this. Okay, what's the best way to stand out, build trust, and create real relationships with passive investors? Okay, this is specifically geared towards standing out, building trust, building actual human-to-human relationships online, specifically with people who can be LPs, who can be passive investors in your deals without selling your soul. Okay, without having to do a bunch of stuff that you hate doing, or getting all complicated in marketing mumbo jumbo, or wasting hours and hours each day trying to figure this out, right? So what's the best way to do that? So here's the framework, okay? At the basis of everything we do when we work with people, and at the basis of everything you're going to want to have for adding investors online, is this framework, right? So you've got your traffic, which is eyeballs, having people coming to you. There's a number of different ways to drive traffic. We'll talk about a few. There's your front door, okay? So ideally having something that pre-sells people on who you are, introduces people to who you are, and builds trust one to many, okay? I'll talk about one of my favorite ways to do that, one of the most powerful ways to do that here in a few minutes. Then someone books a phone consultation, okay? Now you may have heard, you may have even seen being on some people's email lists that, hey, if you just build a big email list and you pitch deals in front of people, sooner or later someone will invest. Maybe. I'll tell you it's different now than it was a few years ago, okay? Based on some of the top people I've talked to, you actually want to build a relationship and have real trust, okay, before you get someone to invest with you, okay? It's not just about having a great deal and hoping the money will come. It's about having those relationships established already, okay? And then that new investor on the back end, having someone on your database, even if they don't invest in the next deal you have, that's okay. You know, having that long-term relationship where they're going to be investing in several deals with you down the road as you're in this long term, okay? So let's talk about your front door. We're going to talk about the traffic piece here in a moment. Let's talk about the front door and one of the most powerful ways to do that, okay? And this is something that we've really revolutionized in this space that not a lot of people were tapping into. This is a process that we created called the Perfect Investor Attraction Webinar. Okay, so I'm going to share with you what that means. So what this investor attraction webinar does, it collects leads. Okay, so it gives people an opportunity to opt in, enter their information, their name, their email address, and you get to find out whether or not they're an accredited investor right out of the gate. Okay. It also builds trust at scale, one to many. I don't know about you, but I don't love repeating myself, right? If you're having conversations with investors, a lot of the questions you're going to get asked are going to be the exact same things, right? So instead of doing that one-on-one and saying the same thing again and again to different people, what if you could do that one to many? What if you could have people who are pre-educated before talking to you, right? Makes things so much easier. It makes the process of getting someone to buy into investing with you that much easier, okay? Investor attraction webinars, they use a proven psychological framework, right? So it's not about overwhelming people with numbers and data. It's not about just pouring information on people. It's about using empathy, understanding where they're at, and establishing trust and credibility, okay? And positioning yourself with that expertise that you have. Okay. It also inspires action. So what's the best way to measure how effective an investor attraction webinar is? It inspires action. Get someone to take the next step, book a call with you, want to learn more about investing with you. Once again, these are not deal specific webinars, right? This is more of an intro presentation, typically about 15 to 25 minutes, where you're answering key questions, building credibility, showing people your investment strategy, and really standing above and beyond most people in this space and starting to establish yourself as a trusted advisor and expert in the types of deals you're doing, okay? It's really important to stand out that way. There's a lot of syndicators out there. There's a lot of people trying to raise capital. Having a tool like this immediately starts to set you apart, okay? And the great thing about investor attraction webinars is there's technology out there, there's tools, and we work with people. We actually set this up for people that are automated. So imagine having a pre-recorded presentation, 15 to 25 minutes, that's set it and forget it, and it works round the clock without you having to be there, okay? That's where the automation piece comes into place. And the other thing that it does, it qualifies leads, and it does a lot of this initial selling, the heavy lifting, as I call it, for you, so you're not having to do it and you're not having to repeat yourself over and over, okay? So what are parts of the perfect investor attraction webinar funnel, okay? And by funnel, we just mean a process, a system for pre-qualifying people, for establishing your expertise, for standing out. Okay, your front door system. So a slide decks, just like right now you're looking at slides that I've created. Okay, you've got your registration page. This is where people opt in. This is where people enter your CRM, right? This is where you collect people's information. Big mistake that a lot of people make is they'll say, oh, where do I find out more about you? They'll say, hey, my website is here. Well, what if instead you could drive people to a specific registration page where you capture their information, right? So imagine, let's just say someone hears you on a podcast, right? And the podcast host says, hey, where can I find out more about you? And you say xyzcapital.com. Cool. I hear that. I go to your website. Maybe I read something and I'm like, okay, you know, I'll reach out to them at some point and then I'm going to forget because there's a million other things coming at me. Or I go to a specific page, I put in my name and email, and now it's very easy. You've captured my information. You can continue building that relationship using systems, right? Using email marketing, reaching out to me in different ways. Thank you page, you know, after people have opted in, and the webinar replay room, right? So somewhere people can go watch the presentation. They know it's pre-recorded. They can watch it at their convenience and really soak in that information. And the automated booking link page, right? So a lot of you already use something like Calendly. There's different platforms for booking calls. What you don't want to be doing is just grabbing people's numbers and then calling them to follow up out of the blue, right? That seems very chasey. It's not good for your positioning. It's not good for credibility. Instead, you want preset appointments on your calendar. I only have, when I talk to people, preset appointments on my calendar, right? That's very, very important. And of course, having them tagged in your autoresponder. And when we say autoresponder, for those of you who don't know, what we're talking about is your email marketing software, right? Something where you can send emails out at scale. Okay, so having them tagged, segmenting your list, a little bit more of an advanced topic, but it's important to have. And then having post-webinar emails. Okay, so typically, we recommend having 7 to 10 follow-up emails. Think of it as a drip campaign that tell people different parts of your story, that tell people different parts of your investment thesis, that answer objections, that inspire action, right? So 7 to 10 emails that kind of reiterate the webinar, make you stand out, and educate people out of the gate, okay? I really believe one of the most powerful things you can do is establish yourself as that trusted advisor, right? Even if you haven't been a GP on many deals yet, even if you haven't been a GP on any deals, if you're the one giving people value, true value, not just information, but true value with your marketing, with your follow-up, you're going to stand out. Because what are most people still doing? They're just trying to add people to their email list and pitch deals cold, right? Not the best strategy. So you want to have a 7 to 10 step email marketing drip campaign, right? Pre-built as part of your front door system. Okay. So top reasons to have this dialed in, if you take nothing away, is something that's worth building out heading into next year. Okay. You stand out to investors, just like we talked about. You establish your credibility. Okay. I mean, think about how many syndicators, how many capital raisers do you know who have this type of system in place? Probably not many, right? You capture leads instead of just driving people to your website, hoping that they reach out. And you're automating the 7 to 10 step follow-up. And now you have them in your system. Now you have them in your autoresponder and your CRM. And the biggest thing is it saves you time. Listen, time is of the essence. You've heard the saying, it's precious. Can't buy back time, right? No matter how much money you have, you can't buy back time. This is going to save you time so you can scale your capital raising. You don't have to worry about doing this stuff manually, okay? The front door system is really important. You can automate a large part of it. The key is in the setup, right? So now let's talk about traffic. There's a number of different ways you can drive traffic online. You can reach people, you can get people in your front door online, okay? So where do you reach potential investors? What are the best places, right? I did a podcast episode on this. If you haven't heard the Raising Capital show, you can look it up. There's an episode on where to find investors. One of our favorite ones, one of the most powerful ones, what we're going to spend the most time on today is LinkedIn, right? So why LinkedIn? First of all, it's a gold mine for reaching potential investors where you can build hyper-targeted lists of potential passive investors. Think doctors, lawyers, entrepreneurs, corporate executives, high-ranking military officials, professional investors, all types of different high net worth individuals. Get really specific in who you're reaching with your message, okay? There's also an opportunity for volume and automation where you can reach people not just by posting content and hoping the right person sees it, but through sending direct messages so it gets in front of people and being more intentional, okay? And the ability to send direct messages at scale using automation. Imagine, it's just like if you were to go to an event, right? Imagine you walked into a room, let's say there were 500 high net worth individuals there, all who had some curiosity around passive investing, right? Well, you can do the same thing online with LinkedIn, and there's some other different platforms this applies to as well, where you can pinpoint those individuals, start conversations in a way that's human, not spammy, not a five-page pitch on how amazing your deal is, right? None of that BS, but direct messages that start conversation, establish commonality, and build that natural level of rapport, okay? And you can take the LinkedIn database, people you're building relationships with, book meetings with those people. You want to extract from social media to your email list, to booking phone meetings, to being part of your investor database, okay? And as far as volume, right, the automation software that's available, our clients are on average are reaching anywhere from 500 to 700 connection requests per week, right, using this automation. So think of that. 500 to 700 connection requests per week, a percentage of those people are accepting, so now they're part of your LinkedIn network, and now you've got a percentage of those people interested, becoming leads, booking calls, right? So everything is very much data driven. So some examples of targeted lists, I'll give you just a few here. And when you think of your ideal investor, I can almost guarantee you can reach those people on LinkedIn. So this is an example. These are just dentists. These are owners of small dental practices in the US. There's 14,000 people you could potentially reach on LinkedIn. Okay. These are CEOs in companies that have under 5,000 employees here in the state of Arizona, where I live, 1,000 plus in the specific niche. People, again, you could potentially connect with, reach out, and build relationships with using LinkedIn. Okay. Angel investors. Okay, these are professional investors, private investors, angel investors, 7,000 plus on this list. And we could really get specific, right? We could go by zip code, we could go by people in your city. There's a number of different, I think there's about 20, let's say there's 23 different filters and combinations for list building on LinkedIn. So you can get really specific when you build these types of lists. So how does the automation look, right? Let me give you a visual of it. Here's the flow chart, right? So imagine you have a hyper-targeted list, whoever your ideal investor is, doctor, lawyer, entrepreneur, CEO, angel investor, military officer, high-level executive, whatever the case may be, right? You have a potential investor, they're on that list, they're receiving a connection request, right? And this process is also duplicatable on Facebook. It's a little different. So inside our program, we talk about how to do this on Facebook and some other channels as well. But for our purposes here, we'll talk about this on LinkedIn. They get a connection request, which is like a friend request on Facebook. Then they connect. Now they're part of your network. They're not getting a pitch message here. This is really important. It's not about just pitching them your deal cold. First of all, in a lot of cases, that's illegal. I already said I'm not an SEC attorney, but it's illegal in a lot of cases. Instead, they're getting a message that delivers value, establishes rapport, and starts a conversation, okay? Oftentimes, after this first message, someone's curious enough, they're gonna wanna book a call, or they're gonna have questions, or they're gonna wanna connect, right? So that's a lead, okay? Now, let's say they don't respond. What happens in the follow-up, right? You've heard the saying, the money is in the follow-up, right? So let's say a couple days go by, you wanna have a follow-up message that goes out, you can automate this process too. Let's say a few more days go by, you wanna make sure getting a third follow-up message, you can automate this part as well, okay? So this entire flow chart through LinkedIn, it's highly automated. The key thing is for it not to look automated, right? So you can customize the message to include their first name. And you can also, the key thing is to establish commonality, right? Establish things where it feels very personalized, where they can connect with you as another human being. Because at the end of the day, it really is about going human to human, okay? So key mistakes to avoid before we open it up into Q&A, right? So posting and hoping, right? So we see a lot of people trying to raise money on social media, trying to find investors where they're saying, well, I'm just going to post something occasionally and maybe someone will reach out to me and want to learn more about investing with me. The issue with that is it's very unintentional, right? You don't know who's going to see it. Shoot, you could have 10,000 connections on LinkedIn. You could post something and maybe have 100 people see it, if that, right? And think about this, when people are scrolling their news feed, they're usually doing something else. They could be cooking dinner, they could be sitting on the john, whatever the case may be. You know, so grabbing someone's attention with your post, it's a bit of a challenge, right? It's a lot less intentional than sending a direct message, right? It's a lot less intentional and direct. With a direct message, you're getting a higher open rate. You're having people see those messages, okay? Sounding stuffy. What does that mean, right? This is where people try to sound super professional or try to use big words or, you know, or try to have a profile that just reads like a resume that sounds fancy schmancy. You don't want to do that, right? You want to be personable here. You want it to sound like you're talking. With that said, you need to be really concise with your messages, okay? Why is that? Because if you're networking with someone in person, if you're connecting with someone in person and you start a conversation with someone, unless they're just an asshole, they're not going to walk away mid-sentence, right? You're going to be say, hey, what's up? My name's John. You just start talking to them. They're not just going to turn around and walk away because that'd just be rude, right? Online, it's a lot different. Online, if you haven't grabbed their attention within a few seconds, they're going to say, oh, next, I got stuff to do. They're not going to read the message, right? So it's really important to be concise and to hook that attention right out of the gate, okay? Pitching out of the gate, big issue, right? So when we say concise, we're not saying, hey, tell them about your deal, tell them about the kind of money they could make. We're talking about establishing curiosity. So inside our programs, I talk about a framework called MEC, right? So and I'll share that with you here. This is the framework for relationship building on social media, right? And it's going to sound super simple, but most people don't do this, right? And you need to understand how to do this, right? So the M stands for meet. So just like in person, when you meet someone, you say hi, right? You don't just start talking at them, right? It'd be weird if you did. The E stands for establishing commonality and curiosity. Okay, what does that mean? Right? So establishing, hey, what do you have in common with that person? Right? The more you have in common, usually the easier it is to break that ice, right? And for it to be genuine, don't lie about the stuff, right? if it's not true, don't lie out of the gates. That's a very bad precedent, right? And then curiosity is saying something that's going to be hyper relevant for that person, right? Understanding where they at, right? Maybe they're at a place where they've got some money sitting in a retirement account and it's been getting whacked by the stock market, right? So establishing that relevancy out of the gate is really important, right? If you know that that person's probably in that position and you start talking about returns and passive income, or start, throwing like IRRs out there and like all this kind of stuff, first of all, they don't know what an IRR is. They don't know what a syndication is in most cases, right? You'd be surprised how many high-level people don't even know what that is. So there's no need to do that. You want to keep it relevant, right? And establishing curiosity to the point where like, okay, I want to find out more about this. That's the first yes. That's the first buy. And it's not like, oh, this sounds amazing. Let me wire you 100K right now. It's about, hey, this is intriguing to me, right? I want to find out a little bit more about this, right? That's all we're doing out of the gate, okay? And the final piece is continuing the relationship, extracting from LinkedIn, from social media to your email list, or ideally to an intro call, right? Where you can build rapport, connect offline, get to know the person, build a real relationship. That's so key, especially now with what's been happening with the economy and where people are out with investing. It's so key to build these real relationships. It's so much more about depth than just growing a big list and just, talking to a bunch of people, right? It's really important to be intentional there. And the big mistake to avoid too is forgetting who you're talking to, right? So you're going to talk to someone who's a tech founder in Silicon Valley differently than someone who's been an executive for 35 plus years at a big corporation, right? It's a different conversation, different tone, different way of using LinkedIn, two very different people, right? So there's no one size fits all approach to messaging. It's much more about a framework and really speaking that person's language, meeting them where they're at. So that's a very key thing, right? And making decisions aren't based on data, right? So this always cracks me up. Someone's like, hey, I tried marketing online, it doesn't work for me. Okay, well, what do you mean by that? Well, I posted something 2 times this week. No one reached out to me. This is BS. It doesn't work. Really? So it's not based on data. Or, hey, I messaged a couple people on LinkedIn. No one responded. Well, how many people did you message? I messaged 10 people. Okay. Who are these people? What did you say? Oh, I don't know. I just don't think it works, right? Not the case. Everything needs to be data driven. So what's the key data to look at? Not just with LinkedIn, but with all of your investor attraction. Let me give you the metrics that we look at, that we show our clients to look at, right? Number one is how you're expanding your network. Let's say connections made per week, right? That's a benchmark to say, okay, how many more people did we add? How many more people are in our sphere per week? Okay. Next thing is leads generated per week. What do we mean by lead generated? That means someone who's expressing interest and curiosity. They could be asking questions, or they could say, hey, I want to learn more about that. Let's book a call, right? So any degree of curiosity and openness, that's a lead generated. That person's raised their hand and they've said, hey, I'm interested, or I'm curious, right? And that's where people start to self-select. And guess what? If people don't, if someone's not responsive or receptive, or someone not interested, it's okay, because you're reaching enough people to where that doesn't matter. You want people to self-select who are truly interested, right? I'd rather you talk to less people, but have them be better qualified and better fits than just talk to a bunch of people and spend all day on the phone, just, doing brain picking or whatever that means, right? Not the most fun thing to do, right? So leads generated, and there's calls booked. Okay, calls booked is a meeting. Could be an intro call. It could be more of an in-depth meeting. In our program, we talk about a 2-step call process. You don't have to do it that way. That tends to work pretty well. Where you're having a meeting with someone, talking about their goals, their challenges, their vision, learning more about what their desires are, and also sharing what you have to offer, right? The meeting isn't a pitch for a specific deal. It's about building a relationship. So now they can be part of your investor club or your investor database. And now they can be in the loop when you do have a deal, right? Because I highly recommend having a system like this in place, regardless of when your next deal is, right? You might not have another deal for another 3 to 6 months, but now would be the time to build the database, right? Rather than have it be in a way where you've got a deal and now you're like, oh shoot, where do I find someone, right? Not the best position to be in, right? Just having a great deal without the relationships doesn't mean the money will come. Anyone who's raised a decent amount of capital can agree with that, okay? So it's really important to make these decisions based on data. And then of course, the last metric is money raised, right? Capital raised, where is it coming from? Are these people actually investing? And there's also an overlooked metric that a lot of people in this space miss, especially if they haven't been in for a while, that I want to share with you. This is where the money's really at, right? It's lifetime value, okay? So Someone invest, let's say year one, right? And people say, hey, I want someone who can write a check for 250K. Okay, cool. So year one, let's say they get in on one deal, they write a check for 50K. Okay. They may have access to more capital, but they want to start at 50K. That's a minimum requirement. They do that. They have a good experience. Now they're your investor database. You're maintaining the relationship, maybe even getting a couple of referrals. Year two, they see another deal. Now they're writing you a check for 100 or 150. Year three, maybe there's another deal they go in as an LP. So sometimes people are so short-sighted. They're like, okay, how quickly can this person invest? How much can they invest? What about lifetime value? What about 3 to 5 years from now? Having people who've invested with you multiple times, where when you have a great deal that you need to take down, you can go to these people and say, hey, here's what we've got. And you can be comfortable and confident that you're going to raise what you need to raise, right? So that's another metric that's really important to think about. And think of it as, even as you're starting out and you're building these long-term relationships. That's what this game is all about, okay? So best ways to put this into implementation before we get into some of the Q&A here, okay? So the first thing that I would say is build the front door system first, right? So set up your webinar funnel, set up the webinar itself, the follow-up emails, set up your email marketing, set up those systems first, especially on LinkedIn as well, setting up the profile so that it's optimized to build trust, build credibility, the targeted list, all those different things that we talked about, okay? Messaging matters, right? Make sure your stuff doesn't sound generic, make sure it doesn't sound cookie cutter, making it stand out in a way that's appealing, especially to who your ideal investor is, making it specific and relevant. And the truth is, seeing this from experience, without experiences can take a while, maybe 6 months or longer to implement, right? So I'm going to share with you, before we get into the Q&A, a shortcut, right? Because this is what we do. We work with people, we build out these systems for them and give them the tools and strategies to go out there and build these key investor relationships. So instead of you having to figure out how to build this on your own, we just build it out for you and give you everything you need to implement this successfully, right? So I'll share an example of that. So Dave is someone, some of you may know Dave, he's gone on to raise a decent amount of capital and he's still in the game. When we started working together, his biggest challenge was finding investors beyond his current network. He couldn't scale because of this, right? And you can see, grew his database by more than 150%, added hundreds of new deal-ready investors, all within a year. And he'll be the first to tell you, just like anyone who's raised a decent amount of capital, the money's in the list, right? The best asset you can have for raising more capital in any economy is the database, the list of potential investors, right? In the automated system, it saves you time from having to go out there and talk to people cold, or having to go out to a bunch of events, kiss babies, do all that kind of stuff, right? You don't need to do you can do some of that stuff. It can add to this, but this is an online system that you can use from anywhere, and it can largely run without you being there to manage it, okay? So what's the best way to experience the fastest results possible, and what can you do next if you want to find out more, okay? So here's who this is for. This is for you if you're planning on raising more capital for multiple deals, if you're truly committed, if you're in this for the long term, there's a substantial amount of capital that you want to raise within the next 12 months, okay? This is for you if you know what types of deals you want to raise capital for, how you're structuring your offerings, syndications, funds, JVs, whatever you're doing, you're very clear on that. That's not our expertise. We have an SEC attorney we can refer you to, but this program is for you if you're clear on what you're going to be raising for, okay? This is for you if you want the fastest results possible. Instead of having to sit there and figure it out on your own, have us build out the system for you, okay? Just for you if you have a growth mindset and you're willing to think big, you're willing to invest in yourself, your business, and your marketing, okay? This is for you if you want an automated, scalable system for adding high net worth investors that's evergreen, that you can use and repurpose for years to come, okay? That's truly what we do when we work with people. It's called the Rapid Investor Attraction System. Best way to find out more, you go to findmoreinvestors.com/form. That'll take you to a quick questionnaire. Just fill out that questionnaire so we can find out a little bit more about you, your capital raising goals. And I'm here to build long-term relationships, okay? I want to chat with you, I want to connect, find out where you're at, where you're going, and see if what we have is a fit for solving this problem of adding investors beyond your current network. Like I mentioned at the start of the call, I believe in the next 12 to 18 months, it's going to be a huge opportunity to take down bigger deals and raise more capital, right? So if you're interested in getting there faster, having a system like this in place to go is findmoreinvestors.com/form. There's zero obligation. It's just a chance for us to connect one-on-one, for me to find out a little more about where you're at, where you're going. And that way we can go from there and see if it's fit. And if it is, I'll share with you what the program looks like. And if it's not, I'll share that with you as well. Okay, so with that said, let me turn on my video here. And looks like we've got some stuff in the chat box. So Vinky, if you have questions, I want to turn it back over to you. And if other people have questions, they can let me know as well. And I want to see what's in the chat box here.
There is a question in the chat from Angel. If you have multiple deals going, how to raise for multiple deals at the same time?
Okay, so I wouldn't necessarily worry about that. I would say build the database, right? So this is about building the database. So if you got multiple deals going, I would just say you don't want to oversaturate people with deals, right? You want to, segment your list well, okay? And if you've got multiple deals going at the same time, I would time them out, right? It's just like, making offers online, right? I don't want to make multiple offers at once because it confuses people, right? So focus on one deal at a time. If people have said no to a specific deal, now transition, hey, this might not be for you. By the way, we've got this other thing happening concurrently, right? So that's what I would do. The biggest leverage point you're going to have is having a list. So the bigger your list, the deeper those relationships are, the easier it's going to be to raise money for multiple deals. Okay, that's the best piece of advice I can give you on
that. Everybody, if you have question, please raise your hand. And our social media friends, if you have question, please put it in the chat or in the comment box there. And I'll also put a link for a meeting. You guys can join us because we might have a networking session after this for a little bit. So far, I do not see any question on the social media. Let me check on LinkedIn too.
So Angel, you could segment them. Yeah, you could segment them by deal. The other thing to think about too is how often are they hearing from you, right? Because here's what a lot of people do. Their list only hears from them when they have a deal, right? If you've been doing that up till now, that's cool. You can't change the past, but I would just say in the future, we teach our students and clients to email at least a couple times a month, right? With stuff that's not deal specific, stuff that educates people, builds value, that's highly relevant, and ideally at least once a week, right? Where you're getting in front of people a lot more often and you're building that real relationship, right? So Angel, to kind of gauge how successful you'll be with that, it's all about where's the depth in your relationships with your list, right? And it may be, the other thing is don't get discouraged if someone says no to a specific deal. It's just no, it's just not right now, or it's not the right deal for them, but keep them on that list. And, the long-term play is in the list, right? So the way that I would recommend segmenting a list too, if that's what you're asking, is we segment by active investors. Okay, so number one, people have already invested with you, right? So even if someone invested with you in a deal 90 days ago, they still might have more capital, right? They still might, be able to invest again, depending on the deal, right? So active investors, then there's deal ready, right? So what does that mean? That means someone, in my perspective, someone you've talked to, approximately how much capital they have to place, you have the relationship. It's just about getting the right deal in front of them at the right time. So that's deal ready. Okay, so solid connection. Then there's everyone else, and there's opted in, right? So there's people who are on your list from various places. You haven't had a conversation with them. You don't know much about them. And it's about moving people up the ladder, right? So that active investor, it's about having them invest again, right? So those are the people to put deals in front of and stay in touch with. That deal ready investor, getting them to invest with you for the first time. And everyone else on the list, getting them to go to book a call with you and be deal ready, right? I would have, the more deal ready investors you have, the more likely you are to have a smoother raise. Okay, what do we have?
Any other questions for Yakov? I do not see anything on the social media. Sorry, I was checking there if you have anything in the comments. I just wanted to ask you one question. You said send a weekly email to your investors to keep them engaged. What could be you're sending them on a weekly basis? So it's like one email is good enough, even though the open rate shows, okay, it's a good rate, maybe 70%, 80%, but are they being engaged? How do we confirm that?
So the open rate on those emails is actually not as relevant, right? It's more about, if I send you an email, even if you don't open it, you see the subject line, you see my name, that's a touch point. Hey, there's Yakov Smart again. He's sending an email. I'm going to get to that later, but there he is. See you next week. Hey, there's this guy again, right? So the open rates tend to go up, and it's that touch point. So imagine this. You've got two people who want to raise capital. Someone's on two different lists. One person only emails when they have a deal. Let's say they have a deal once a quarter, and then you hear from them like 10 times that week because they're scrambling to raise, right? The second person is emailing once a week, and then they've got a deal once a quarter. Like, okay, I hear from this guy a lot. I like his stuff. okay, now they've got a deal, cool, there's more comfort. So it's 52 touch points versus what, a handful of touch points, that are actually relevant, that aren't just pitching a deal, right? So it's a really powerful way to stand out. It takes just a little bit of extra effort. So things you could say, okay, so keeping it relevant, right? Understanding what are some questions they probably have, right? People are looking at, hey, how's the market doing? What's the outlook? Future trends is always a great topic, okay? Personal stories that relate to investing advice, okay? Hot topics around, and inside our program, we have a list of angles, right? So different, I'm trying to remember some of them off the top of my head, different angles you can use in your marketing, right? One angle is, a lot of people don't know they can use their IRA or 401k as a self-directed and put into alternative investments, right? That's one email. They may not have a clue. There's about $4 trillion apparently sitting in these retirement accounts, right? A lot of people don't know that can be redeployed. They don't have to be, getting whacked by the stock market, right? That's one angle, right? So another angle is, the power of tax benefits, right? There's a whole different rabbit hole there. Another angle is passive income. Is it real? Does it work? How does it work, right? A lot of people don't understand what cash flow investing means, right? You see what other angles I can remember that whole list. There's passive income. There's, why your asset class is relevant and recession resistant, how you mitigate risk, how your investment thesis may be changing, all these different things, right? So there's different rabbit holes, differently a piece of micro content you can put in front of people, and it doesn't have to be long-winded, it doesn't have to be stuffy, it doesn't have to be fancy, but think of it as just, you're quickly informing people, keeping it relevant, answering something that they're probably thinking of already, and now you're providing that level of value. All right, looks like we've got a question in the chat.
I think Angel has another question. We are building our AUM by really sticking to our backyard. We have some local investors and then many other investors across the nation. Do you think we would be more successful working with our local investors more, or continue to focusing on our whole list regardless of the location?
If you've already got some ways of getting people in the door across the nation, and that's working well, if you have data that both are investing with you equally, then keep doing that. Generally, what I've seen is local tends to be lower hanging fruit. Doesn't have to be right in your backyard, but in your city, for example, because there's that thing in common, right? Hey, I live in Phoenix, you live in Phoenix. Oh, shoot, if we wanted to meet in person, not that we have to, but that's available, right? So it tends to be a little bit easier. So I would cultivate both. And as you're bringing other people, maybe, cultivate their markets as well. So no, I wouldn't. And I mean, it depends, right? But I think you can have success with both. I've seen people having success with both. If you said that you want to only be local, that could work too. It's just a matter of how much money you want to raise, who that ideal investor is, and also where you live too. If you live in the middle of nowhere, right? Which actually that's not true. I was going to say if you live in a state like Wyoming or a place like that, but there's a lot of high net worth individuals there. So you might have less investors and build those deeper relationships. So unless you're living in a place that's like a very kind of rural, underdeveloped area, then local, there's a bunch of gems, right? So like here in Phoenix, there's a lot of high net worth individuals, millions of people living here. You could build that list, right? Tertiary, yeah, okay.
And I think, you talked a lot about the outreach to new investors, particularly in your market, right? In Arizona, high net worth individuals, CEOs. As you do that, and I understood the process of bringing them in, starting them on this campaign, automating that as best you can. What percentage of conversion do you see, right? Like I've reached out to 1,000 doctors in my county that are at least 40 years of age, right? In a high net worth county in the Bay Area. And I've seen nothing from it, right? Maybe 20 people have accepted my LinkedIn invitation, maybe 3 following us on LinkedIn, but nobody's downloaded the ebook, nobody's, right? So just curious, as you go through this, what kind of numbers are you looking at? How many people do I want to add 10,000 people on LinkedIn that are new to see, $500,000 raise?
So wait, you've reached out to 1,000 people?
Yep.
Is that an exact, okay, you reached out to 1,020 have connected with you?
Yep.
Something's off there. I've never, that's what 2% have connected. That's not even, booked calls that's have connected. I would double check that they actually got a connection request. I know that may sound silly, but I've never heard it that low. To me, unless your profile screams sales, unless your profile is, hey, I sell doctor stuff, I'm going to sell you stuff as soon as we connect, either directly or indirectly, that could be turning people off. But that's a remarkably low, especially if they're local. That number is almost difficult to fathom for me. So
what's a good solid number? And I'll go back and look and double check and share. But what's a good solid number of return? Like for every 1,000 you outreach to that meet what you believe is a decent criteria on like the LinkedIn to convert to, not necessarily to doing a deal, but convert to, hey, they've downloaded our ebook and now they're going to do a call or attended a webinar or something.
So I wouldn't drive them directly to an ebook because that number can be a little misleading. If you wanted to, you could. Not the approach I would recommend. But I usually say on LinkedIn, par for connection acceptance rate is about 15 to 20% within about 2 weeks, right? Doctors sometimes are a little slower, but 15 to 20%. So if you truly sent out 1,000 connection requests and it had been a couple of weeks, I'd say at least 150 to 200 would have accepted. Anything less than that, there's some red flags on the profile, or there's something you're saying in the connection message that's completely throwing them off, right? So it's kind of a minimum baseline par. And then from there, typically we see people, it varies, right, depending who they're talking to, but typically, we shoot for 2 to 3 calls a week, kind of as, again, par. That number can be a little higher, that can be a little lower. Again, there's different variables. And these are actual calls booked, right? Not someone downloading an ebook, right? So, I would look at the profile, I'd look at exact metrics too. And then just kind of figuring out, because there's one of 3 things on any social media, actually. Let's take a step back. Whenever there's a challenge or something's not working as well as we want it to work, it's one of 3 things, maybe a combination of 3 things that are off, right? So there is the targeting that could be off, right? Maybe in your case, that's not the case. It's spot on, it's precise, or maybe not. There's the targeting, there's the messaging, and there's the processing, right? So if one of those 3 things are off, that has a negative impact on results. If 2 or 3 of those things are off, then you get very little, if not any results, right? So targeting, messaging, processing, it sounds like in your case, maybe the processing is a little off without you even knowing it. And that could be you don't have the exact metrics. Messaging could be off too. And even the targeting, specifically, even though it doesn't sound like it, but they're local doctors, maybe you can drill down a little bit deeper. Maybe that's not the right group for you to target, right? So the biggest thing, and if you're looking at, okay, how much capital is that going to lead to? The only solid thing that you have, and you never know until you actually raise, right? Until you actually say, okay, we've got a deal. Let's do this, right? You never truly know, but the best indicator of that is, okay, number of deal ready investors on your list. So if you had, let's say, 50 doctors on your list, they were deal ready, you knew at ballpark, how much capital they could commit to, and now you're doing a raise, that's where you can have a pretty accurate projection, right? Although it might be with what's been happening in the market and the economy, it might be you probably want a bigger list than before for getting those accurate projections. But that's, if you see what I'm saying? So if you just say, hey, this many people download our ebook, that doesn't indicate or project onto anything. It's a complete crapshoot, right? Because they could have downloaded an ebook and might not even have a penny to spare, right? So it's one of those things. Biggest data is actual people on the list who you've talked to and built relationships with.
Hey, Yakov, I've found that LinkedIn and Facebook, of course, they have these little algorithms that they put out there to try to keep the spammers down. And so I'm just wondering if there's the I don't know. I know that I got message one time, it says you sent too many invites out and you got too many I don't knows back. And so I think I got sort of on the low, I got on the low list, not quite a blacklist, but the low list for a while. And then they have to decide how many of your messages they're actually sending out. Like like you said in the first place, because I think sometimes their servers get overwhelmed.
I don't think it's the servers. I think it's there's an algorithm. It's the percentage of people accepting, right? So if you have common, like for example, if you have a second degree connection, you have a common connection with someone, that likelihood goes up of them accepting, right? So
Right.
yeah, so yeah, and if not enough people
Different
are,
algorithms, yeah.
then maybe like Jared was saying, maybe the connection requests weren't actually going out, right? So that throws off the data.
So the bottom line is it's giving people information that they want to hear again. And they want to get the next piece. You've described several.
Yep.
If they're getting information from you, more likely they're going to say, yeah, I want to hear more.
Yeah, and grabbing their attention, exactly, grabbing their interest. And it looks like Matt has a question here, Matt Kontov. Do you recommend using a VA for your periodic emails? Yes. And by that, I don't mean having them write it, right? Because most VAs aren't copywriters. And there's some strategies you can use to make the messaging, that writing process easier. But as far as like pressing the button to queue up the email, yeah, like, because that stuff's not fun to do yourself, and nor should you do it yourself, right? Same thing with managing these systems, right? And for those of you who may not know, a VA is a virtual assistant, right? So yeah, and that's a whole different topic. Again, on the podcast, we have a whole episode when to hire a VA. So if you want to go down that rabbit hole, we can listen to that one, and that's the Raising Capital show.
That's good. I have one more question for you, Yakov. Earlier you were saying, there might be sometimes that somebody's account is flagged, so they're not getting the traction that they're looking for. So how can somebody tell if their account is flagged for some odd reason?
If their what is flat?
The account is red flagged.
So the automation software tells you how many requests got sent out, but the biggest thing is like responses, right? If you can look at, if you go on Monday morning, you say, hey, on LinkedIn today, I have 10,000 connections. And that next Monday morning, it's I have 10,001 connections, and you think you sent out 500 requests, then that's an issue, right? Then you didn't really send out 500 requests. If the account is flagged, LinkedIn will usually tell you. So yeah, it's just like being able to see that the connections go up. That's the first indicator. If the number of connections didn't go up, then the connections probably didn't go out.
Great. Thank you. Do we have any more questions for Yakov? Let me check social media one more time. I don't see anything. Thank you, Yakov. That was a really, really good session.
Awesome.
A lot of great
that was really good. Thank you so much, Yakov.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And